So the goal of the Life with Voices videos is to help teach people how to have a positive voice experience, one that adds value to their life instead of causing damage. Before we start, have you ever worried about your socks matching when you go outside? Whether or not you hear voices, if you answer yes, technically that is being delusional and paranoid about a hallucination. Color isn't something that truly exists in the outside world. Instead, it's just wavelengths that are being absorbed and reflected, as you might remember from high school physics. It's actually your brain that is converting these wavelengths into the experience of color. And if you are worried about matching your socks, then you're technically adjusting your life to fit this hallucination, which can be called delusional. Plus, most people will never see your socks under your pants, so I'm sure that somebody out there would label it as a paranoid behavior. Now, of course, hearing voices is different than seeing color. We have an entire industry of fashion around matching colors and kind of appreciating it. There's people's jobs that it is to design the perfect color combinations for companies and for how we live our everyday life. The main difference between seeing color and hearing voices is that we all, for the most part, see color. There are certain countries and societies in the world that don't see color in the same way. For example, the Himba tribe doesn't see the color blue. They just don't. If you gave them a group of squares and all of them are green and one was blue and you asked them to say which square is different, they would not be able to tell you. People that are colorblind are actually lacking a common human hallucination. But the point is that overall, with color, we know how to incorporate it into our lives. And we know how to interact with each other in this mutual hallucination. With that said, even before we knew what color was, humanity was living perfectly happily in the shared hallucination. Just like with color, I'm not here to convince you that voices are or are not something external or internal. The overall perspective is that this is one of the least important parts about living life with voices. The back and forth of what is happening matters so much less than being able to manage any confusing beliefs, deal with hostile voices, and overall create a good experience while living. So that's going to be the purpose of these videos, is really guiding you through the different tools and strategies for the most common challenges that come up from hearing voices. And just like living with color, once you're able to organize this stimulus of hearing voices and know how to react to it, it can be just another part of your daily life. So when it comes to hearing voices, there are two main approaches. One is to ignore them and to not believe anything they say. That does work for some people. For some people, ignoring your voices will make them fade over time, will let you train your attention to focus on the physical world. And if you don't believe anything they say, then you kind of avoid a lot of the confusing beliefs that can come from hearing voices. This approach does have problems. For example, what if your voices tell you that your family loves you and that you're strong and that everything's going to be okay? If the rule is to never believe your voices about anything, well, does that mean that you should believe that your family is not on your side? Having this kind of general approach creates a lot of strange situations. Another problem with this approach of ignoring your voices is that it's a lot easier said than done. Over time, if your voices keep talking to you, it's very hard to just maintain the choice to ignore them. And so most people who hear voices will eventually interact with them. It's simply the truth. Lastly, not everyone who hears voices wants to get rid of them. For some people, it's a very positive experience where the voices are friends and guides, motivate them, have great conversations, or otherwise add value. In cultures, in fact, where voices are expected to be positive, they're more likely to be your friends and to give you really meaningful insights about the world. In fact, just for argument's sake, if you believe in the medical model, then constantly being asked, are your voices hostile or are your voices threatening, sets the expectation within your subconscious for how voices should behave, and actually leads them to be hostile or threatening. And ignoring your voices can also really damage the relationships you have with them until you end up in a very hostile voice ecosystem. Voice ecosystem, by the way, that's the second approach. For people who are unable or don't want to get rid of their voices, you can actually influence the relationship and the experience. You can set rules for how your voices interact with you. For example, that they will never force your attention when you're within 10 feet of a person that you care about, or when you're working on a project that's very important to you. You can navigate the relationships to be more positive. You can untangle and prevent confusing beliefs and really make sure that you don't have hostility, but rather a culture of positivity between you and your voices. These videos will focus on this second approach, helping you build a voice ecosystem that overall adds quality to your life. The main dangers of the ecosystem approach are that your attention can be trained to interacting with the voices instead of focusing on the physical world. The tools of this work will help you to avoid any trouble that can come up related to your attention. The other danger is that the more that you engage with your voices, the more conflict can become your experience. The tools of this work will also help you to deal with hostile voices and navigate conflict back to harmony. The overall goal is to talk to the voices that you enjoy talking to on topics that you enjoy talking about, and strictly when you want to talk to your voices. When you have this overall positive voice experience, voices can be guides and friends even that help talk through your day, provide additional insight. Even in the medical model, it's easier to think in dialogue than it is to have a single stream of consciousness. Overall, the bottom line is that for those of you who do not want to get rid of their voices or who can't get rid of their voices, there is another approach, building a positive voice ecosystem that begins to add value to your life instead of causing damage to your life with voices. So what are the different frameworks for understanding the experience of hearing voices? Most of you are probably familiar with the medical model, which is that voices are coming entirely from our subconscious. This model has a lot of benefits. As we said, it's easier to cut off any confusing beliefs if you don't trust your voices with any of their messages. Also, it's easier to train your attention to the physical world. There are dangers to the medical model as well, which are interesting, so I'll mention them. One is that if the voices are coming from your subconscious, then being constantly asked if they're threatening or being hostile sets the expectations for how they will behave. So oddly enough, in the medical model, being told to be scared of your voices influences the interactions into something a lot more negative. The other biggest problem with the medical model is that when people are solving problems inside their own head, they tend to isolate. They tend to not live a life in the external world where they go out and just enjoy what the world has to offer. Whether that's having strange beliefs about spirits but hiking through a forest, or having other frameworks but still living. Solving the problem inside your own head is something that is a lot more common among the medical model community. With that said, the tools and strategies of this work will focus on helping you in any framework. And most people that hear voices will alternate between believing in the medical model or considering another possibility. Of course, they will. It's how we perceive the world. It's like being told to ignore the existence of color. There will be times when you consider what it might possibly be, other than the subconscious model that we are taught. So what are the other common models? Telepathy model is where people believe that they are hearing the thoughts or subconscious thoughts of other people. Spiritual model is that people are communicating to spirits or deities. Ancestor model, people are communicating to the deceased. Alien model, of course, is pretty self-explanatory. Technology that we're picking up on radio waves or anything else. Conspiracy model is often some combination of the other ones, but being deliberately used against us. And a lot of people have mixed models where they say, look, we're picking up some data from the outside world, whether it's from people's brainwaves or technology, radio waves, and then our subconscious creates the final voice, which is why everything has consistent internal characters, but has that feeling of externality. So there are a lot of different frameworks for understanding voices, but recent research and kind of the school of thought that I belong to is that the framework for understanding voices is probably the least important part of having a happy life while living with voices. It does not actually matter that much. Think about it this way. There are plenty of people that believe that the earth is flat. And my apologies if you are in this community, but the point is, there are many flat earthers who live happy lives, who can choose their community, engage with their community on a large variety of topics, and have jobs and families. Having a strange belief does not disqualify you from a happy life. It's more about knowing how to navigate it. Again, knowing how to untangle confusing beliefs, deal with hostile voices, and overall set rules and a culture of positivity in your voice ecosystem. To understand why voice hearers are likely to consider another model in addition to or instead of the medical model, it's important to think about it from the voice hearer perspective. There have been hundreds of millions of people who have heard voices. Now, all good science starts with observation, and these hundreds of millions of people have all observed an experience that they say feels very real and external, with an intense creativity that seems too complicated to be coming from themselves. The people who tell voice hearers that everything is purely from their subconscious are almost always the people who have never personally experienced it. Now, imagine if it just started tomorrow. If just all of a sudden we wake up, 5 to 10% of humanity starts hearing voices. Of course, the government would explore every possible option, including technology from foreign nations, alien, spiritual. There would be a huge investigation. But because voices were labeled as subconscious, long before anybody knew anything about technology or modern science, the issue has been considered closed, even though it has never been truly proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now, the good news is that whatever model you believe in, no voice will ever actually show up at your door. Well, that's the good news and the bad news. The voice hearing community is connected enough that we know this simply as a guarantee. It hasn't happened to any of us. With that, we again say that the model of what a voice is becomes the least important part for having a happy life while hearing voices. For example, people in the beginning of hearing voices can spend a year or even more saying, oh, what is this? Is this alien? Is it technology? Is it medical? But it's an endless back and forth. Voice hearers who are more experienced, when they come across a new voice, can label it as a Looney Tune or as a alien or a subconscious. It doesn't matter. They just put it into a storyline where they have the power to navigate the relationship and set the rules for the interactions. And setting these rules and avoiding confusion from voices is so much more important than being able to definitely say, yes, that is what voices are. So even though I've presented a lot of the different frameworks for hearing voices, this work will really give you strategies that can help you whether you are a medical model or any other viewpoint. And if you're a family member or a provider or academic and it feels scary or dangerous to give any breathing room for a model other than the medical model, we understand having somebody that you love start to hear voices is a very scary experience for you too. Just remember that hearing voices is an experience that is truly there. Not to say that it's medical or not medical, but it is genuinely being experienced. So if you're asking somebody to abandon their beliefs about what it is, treat it similarly to asking them to change a political position or any other deeply held experience of reality. If you have an honest conversation with that level of humility, the person that you care about is a lot more likely to consider your point of view too. So with that, let's move closer to the actual strategies and tools for a life with voices. As we conclude an introduction to hearing voices, the first important skill to learn is how to communicate to the people you care about what is happening and how they can help and be supportive. The most common metaphors of living life with headphones on or things like that really don't capture the experience. They don't show how voices have deeper personalities, are actively commenting about your life, and have linear storylines that can be influenced over time. My favorite metaphor for explaining what's happening is getting stuck in Twitter or in Facebook. The normal feed of posts is your stream of consciousness. One post leads to the next, leads to the next. For people who hear voices, however, imagine that every so often there are just random groups of posts that your mind is clearly labeling as other, and that can be in all caps and bright colors meant to grab your attention. Just like the internet, the average post from another person is a bit meaner than what you get in the physical world. And it's pretty hard to ignore. So in that situation, you are again left with the two choices. You can either learn to ignore all of the posts in your feed that are being labeled as coming from other, or you can learn to navigate that situation, how to make these posts more positive, how to stop these foreign posts from interrupting your stream of consciousness when you're doing something important or are with a person that you care about. When communicating what it's like to hear voices, probably the most important part is letting those around you know the things they do that are hurting you. Society has so little faith in people who hear voices. And getting that experience from our loved ones is often as painful or more painful than the actual experience of hearing voices. Everybody has a childhood memory of not being believed by someone they care about when they were telling the truth. Whether or not voices are medical model or anything else, constantly not being believed by those around us is deeply painful. And when that lack of faith spills over into our perspectives on society or politics or just talking about things that are going on in the world around us, in our neighborhood, losing the faith of everyone that we care about is often the most painful part of hearing voices. So communicate to your loved ones clearly to be careful of this, to avoid their own judgment, and to maintain that support in you and your new life with voices. As the voice here, it's also very important to keep your physical world relationships. If you constantly engage with your voices when there are other people around you, they will notice. And the people who care about you most will notice first when you can't pay attention to them, or when you do things that you cannot explain because your stories with your voices are a bit too weird to say out loud. If you engage too deeply with your voices, there's a chance that you will start treating the voices as the real relationships and the people in the physical world as the characters. And you can drift from everyone that is a meaningful physical world connection. Your voices leading you to lose your physical world community is possibly the greatest damage that they can do. So whatever you do, be sure to share some of your experience. If you're having trouble paying attention, then write emails or share social media posts, but stay connected. Having a physical world life is one of the most important parts of keeping happiness while hearing voices. So to conclude the introduction to hearing voices, the goal for those who can't or don't want to get rid of their voices is to build a positive voice experience. This means knowing how to untangle and prevent confusing beliefs, knowing how to navigate hostile voices, and how to overall set rules and a culture of positivity in your voice hearing experience. The actual frameworks for how you understand voices are probably the least important part. And there are academic studies to support that as well. What you think is happening when you hear voices is so much less important than being empowered to set the rules and experience that comes with a life with voices. Most importantly, don't lose your physical world connections. Stay close to your family and friends. Be sure to share in new experiences with them, communicate, and let them know if they are hurting you with a lack of faith. I also have a website, lifewithvoices.com. There's a great forum where people in the community can chat and share strategies and support. A lot of the tools of these videos are available in a lot more detail in my book, Life with Voices, A Guide for Harmony, which you can find on Amazon. And although these videos are free, standardizing the strategies took me over a decade of work. So feel free to leave a donation at PayPal, which you could find through my website. It really allows me to keep helping the voice hearing community and people who are now living life with voices. In the next section, we're going to dive a lot deeper onto beliefs and how to navigate confusing beliefs and strange beliefs while hearing voices.